Fighting games have not really had a good track record with story modes. It's ironic, seeing as how fighting games usually still had plots. The problem is, it would be hard to tell what the story was until a second game came out and narrated what happened last time. To be fair though, nobody really cared. What was, and still is the most important thing, is the gameplay. However, as more and more people are starting to play games, fighting games needed to find a way to attract a casual market. The easy way to do that is a very cinematic story mode. Some fighting games have had story modes, but not to a cinematic quality. Some of the older MK games were very adventure-gamey, which Brawl, I think, did the best.
Smash Bros. Isn't a fighting game!
Shut up, my video. The story for Brawl was very basic, but it did mix its gameplay in very well, to the point of having real boss fights. However, the cinematic stories we are more familiar with probably started in Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. I'm not going over that game because it's awful. So, going by games with intricate stories, I'm going to see if any work and whether or not these types of stories should continue, or if fighting games should even have stories. As important as the gameplay is, I am not a good enough fighting game player to go over the smallest of details. This will solely be on the narratives. And I'm not covering visual novel-like stories in some games since they take way too long and have multiple pathways to go. Sorry, BlazBlue. Since we are skipping that, the first of these will be MK9. This manages to be both a soft reboot and a hard reboot. Soft, and that takes place directly after Armageddon. There is direct continuity from the last game, but you do not need to play the previous games to understand what's happening, since the timeline is starting over anyway. And a hard reboot because shit's gonna change and shit's different enough already. More on that a little later. All you need to know is that everyone dies and the villain wins, so a god pussies out and tries to prevent this by sending an incredibly vague message to a younger version of himself. Because we need a mystery now. The story takes place during Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, but now with the knowledge that things need to change to prevent Armageddon. At first glance, things don't really seem much different from how they used to be. Maybe a couple of late plot points and character development are now implemented earlier, such as the human forms of Cyrax and Sector, having Kano be an Aussie in the original trilogy, and maybe have some characters appear earlier than intended, but things aren't much different when dealing with the MK1 story. Going into MK2, things do change up a little bit, where there are still ripples, but nothing too major just yet. To explain, Shao Kahn kills Kung Lao, Melina is born way later than she was originally planned, Sub-Zero is turned into a cyborg instead of Smoke, and only Sonya is kidnapped since Kano is much more on the bad side this time. These changes don't really change too much, as Raiden himself complains about.
It cannot be. Shao Kahn is dead. Yet the future remains unchanged.
However, when it gets to MK3, this is where the story shines. Mostly because your brain runs wild as to where the story will go, since things really change. Shao Kahn kills Shang Tsung and transfers his power to Sindel, making her incredibly powerful. She then proceeds to kill majority of the hero cast! People who are important to the later story! Oh! As convenient as this is, these characters are important to the original timeline, so their deaths are going to cause major change. This single act helps make the story go from meh to this changes so much, where's it going to go? It's more the potential of how the story is going to play out that makes it good. Even if you never wanted a sequel, a Red Wedding-style massacre usually makes anything automatically fantastic. And more people die, such as Raiden accidentally killing Liu Kang, Quan Chi now having the souls of many people under his command, and Shao Kahn actually being dead for good, which is a big change as stated before, since he ultimately wins in the original timeline. This last part is what makes the story so much better. It's not flawless though. Since it only gets better towards the last third, that means that 2/3 are just okay, which is a huge detriment. Plus, any cutscene fights that happen are
You're good.
underwhelming. However, the story might be more subtle than one might think. If you know already, or do the research from the story for the original timeline, you'll notice that things are already different before the heroes actively try to change things. This may be a well-hidden hint that someone meddled with the past before Raiden gets to, which is hinted at after the credits. It's surprisingly well done, unless the writers either forgot about the original story, didn't care, or retconned it. Either way, because of how its story is presented and how it manages to make things so different that it leaves a great impact on the player, this is the best fighting game story so far, and it's the first one. Oh, this is going to be good. Next is Soul Calibur 5, which is... ugh. Okay, let me lead you in first. The whole point of the story is that people want to wield a powerful sword named Soul Edge for their own reasons, while the sword itself wants a suitable host. The sword gets a host named Siegfried, and he proceeds to ruin the world. He eventually manages to detach himself and try to redeem himself, but now the sword forms its own body, named Nightmare. So the overarching plot deals with people either wanting to kill Nightmare to gain Soul Edge, or kill him to protect the world, but also people might want to kill Siegfried for his sword Soul Calibur for its power, or to kill him for his previous crimes, while at the same time Siegfried and Nightmare try to kill each other. This plot goes from the first game, Soul Blade, to the end of Soul Calibur 4 and is resolved at the start of 5. So, where do we go from here? 5 takes place 17 years after Soul Edge is destroyed. It's nice to see some characters 17 years later after this whole ordeal took over their lives, but the whole plot seems fabricated. It mostly deals with the children of Sophitia, named Patroclus and Pyrrha, and the return of Nightmare, instead of giving us a new villain or making a different villain the main one. Then the end deals with Sophitia's soul, but now it's evil? It makes no sense and it's told poorly. This might be a budget issue, but most cutscenes are image-based, which only once in a while having regular cutscenes. If it is budget-based, there's not much that can be done, but if it was done for style, it was a dumb decision. The one thing I can give the story is that the dynamic of the main characters is not bad. Patroclus is a complete ass, but ends up getting his own version of Soul Calibur and definitely softens out by the end, while Pyrrha is the sweet and innocent one who has enough demons to be worthy of Soul Edge. It's really the only interesting thing, as the story is just flat all around. Probably why no one ever mentions it. Injustice is where NetherRealm tried to do more of an original story, and to implement what they learned from MK9 into a brand new game. What we get is a story that had great potential, but really squandered it. It starts off with Batman interrogating Joker as he just nuked Metropolis. Then Superman charges in and we learn that Joker tricked Supes into killing Lois and their unborn child. He then fucking murders the Joker. What a great setup. I wonder where this is going.
I can see the headlines. Justice League fails. Clown kills millions. You gave him a nuke?
What?
He dies.
Wait, is this a flashback? What's going on?
And keep quiet.
Oh.
Now that's funny.
Oh no. How lazy can you be? Okay, so when this game was first being advertised, the plot looked incredible. It's like DC's Civil War, but with huge stakes, characters constantly switching sides, and possible terrible ramifications. But the closer the game got to release, the more people realized that it's an alternate dimension and the main one travels there. Basically, it's another what if Superman became evil type story, but instead of being self-contained, the main universe comes in to solve the problem. The whole plot comes down to, we can't beat an evil Superman, so try to find a way to get good Superman here to beat him. Any great potential is lost since instead of having just this Injustice universe, they just call in the main universe to solve all of their problems. And let's talk about Clark, shall we? In the game, it makes it like after he pulled a fatality on the Joker, he just became a dictator. However, in the comics, it fleshes out this dilemma and shows that it took a while for him to come to this mindset, which paints a bit of a sympathetic light on him. But this is presented nowhere in the game and just makes Superman a soulless child murderer. So, lost potential and a very underdeveloped villain is the crux of this plot. The story overall isn't horrible, but it's not great either. It's incredibly basic. It played it too safe and would have benefited from not having multiple universes in one universe. Mortal Kombat X now has to live up to the potential that MK9 left. How does it do, and can it stand on its own? Let me start by saying this. This game is beautiful, and the choreography of the fights and the cutscenes are hella improved, and are really cool as well. In any case, the story starts off a few years after the end of MK9. It basically deals with the Earthrealm forces holding off Shinnok's invading forces. They succeed, and then it skips some more time ahead, and will only occasionally show more details about the fight against Shinnok. For now, we have the new characters, and honestly, they're pretty good. Well, Kung Jin is an ass and screws up a lot, but not without reason. The story has 3 major plot points: introducing the new Earthrealm warriors, the Outworld Civil War, and the resurrection of Shinnok. The first part is mostly just used to introduce us to new characters, and again, show us what the old ones are up to. The most interesting part of the story is the Outworld Civil War. With Shao Kahn's death, there is a power vacuum now, as there is no ruler of Outworld. Mileena and cohorts believe that since Mileena is Shao Kahn's daughter, that she should rule, while others believe that a much better candidate is Kawatal, aka Kotal Khan, the new character. In this age of heroes versus heroes, it's refreshing to have a villains versus villains, and for a purpose too, not just egos clashing. While, once again, the brunt of the war is featured in the comics, it still works, and it is interesting enough to where you don't really need to know the rest of the war's happenings, minus how Mileena got Shinnok's amulet. It works until the last point Hard turns in and takes over the rest of the game, which is Shinnok's resurrection and the plan to stop him. While this isn't a bad part, it is much weaker than the Civil War, since the war just ends and the plot now moves into this portion. And the ending is a bit underwhelming until, again, the sequel is set up and the possibilities grow in your mind. It is definitely one of the better stories, but I think it's still weaker than MK9. I feel like if you've interwoven the Shinnok part into the Civil War part more seamlessly, it might have worked. In-game, as soon as Mileena dies, the plot just jumps to the focus on Shinnok. Since Mileena had his amulet, maybe she could have forced Quan Chi on her side and promised him ownership over everything so long as she gets to rule Outworld. The threat would be raised as Shinnok would be on her side, intertwined with the war, and this would be a problem for everyone. Then if Mileena was still killed, then the Shinnok part can commence, and he is no longer under Mileena's control. Something more seamless. Plus, the random cameos from past MK fighters really adds nothing, and is just pure fan service. So, still a good one, if a bit weaker. Street Fighter V story shouldn't exist, and it's so bare bones and does nothing of interest. Shadaloo has plans for world domination, and a shadowy organization is beginning to rise in the background, and now it is up to our heroes to stop them. Sounds simple? Because it is. How to fix it? Never should have happened, or made some aspects worth it. They resurrect Charlie just to kill him again. Bison finally dies, but in just one round, and not by Guile or Charlie, or Chun-Li, but by Ryu again. He doesn't even get a super boss form! This is supposed to be the canonical last appearance of Bison. Make it worth it. Make it as epic and fairly difficult as possible. But no. One round and it's done. Rashid's main reason for fighting against Shadaloo is that one of his friends is killed by them. Fair enough, as it gives good incentive for him to be involved, but we barely see the character, and we are not aware of that character's connection to Rashid. So much so that most people usually think that they killed a named character, not a nameless jobber. The narrative is so bare bones that I can barely go over it. The secret organization is just the Illuminati, which leads into Street Fighter III. The character with the most potential was Necalli. He seemed to be the precursor to the Satsui no Hado, and would have provided a great character development moment for Ryu. Instead, he's some Aztec monster who likes killing people. God damn it. It's just a waste of time, and they should have gave a shit. Who am I kidding? It's modern Capcom. They don't listen to fans. They just want money. Injustice 2 is definitely an improvement over the first one, in that it solely takes place in the Injustice universe. Superman has been locked up for some time, but now 2 new threats emerge. The Society, a group of villains aiming to take down both the regime and the insurgency, and Brainiac, who's there to collect Earth. It is paced a lot better this time around, and there's no easy solution. Hell, what I love about this is that not only is it an uneasy team-up to take down an enemy, it's not like other versions of this in media. Usually when enemies team up, they eventually reconcile their ways and become friends. In Injustice 2, the regime still wants to protect the world and don't really want to follow Batman's no-kill policy. They're not going to change their ways just because they teamed up with old friends. This actually creates some drama and sad moments as they want to be friends again, but their ideologies are clashing too hard. This game also has amazing facial animation. A fighting game of all things has great facial animations. Plus, if MKX had the choreography, then this has the best action set pieces. It's not very fighting gamey, but it is like a superhero brawlout. There are still problems, of course. Some characters can be utilized better for one thing. Deadshot's only working with the Society since he has a bomb in his head and Garage has the trigger. It would have been cool if it managed to get disabled and he ended up working with Batman indirectly only because he hates Superman more or something along those lines. There's a fantastic scene where Scarecrow manages to make Wonder Woman doubt herself for a bit and make her believe that she's responsible for Superman turning evil. How about having that with Superman and Batman as well? Have them question their motives. The biggest problem, though, is pretty minor. Some characters only appear because I guess the team didn't want to waste character models and shoehorn them into the story. The biggest examples being Atrocitus, Swamp Thing, and Joker. Basically glorified cameos to not waste them. I feel like they could have just kept them gameplay exclusive and not bother adding them into the story since they really have no purpose, but whatever. Since it is a fighting game, I suppose it won't go into philosophy, but I feel like the issue of superheroes killing could have been a cool one. Are superheroes above the law and willing to kill someone who's deemed a big threat, or do heroes have to abide by the law like anyone else, and killing people will make them seem more like villains? Or are we just okay with buff guys punching each other in the pecs and the occasional cat fight? The important questions to ask. So this one was handled much better than the first one, and is definitely one of the better fighting game stories. Tekken 7 is better than Street Fighter V, but not by much. I mean, it does state the story as the Mishima Saga, but they took it very literally, as only the stuff dealing with Kazuya and Heihachi are done okay. Any other moment doesn't add up to anything, and by the end there are a lot of plot holes and almost no loose ends tied up, and pretty much not resolving Tekken 6's plot at all. It's just an excuse to make the game longer, and in the wrong way. The narrator seems to really serve no purpose at all, and his face is hidden, because, he's normal looking, I guess? The small glimpses we got show that it's probably modeled, so I don't know what's up with that. And Akuma's here now. Guess he didn't want to be in one shitty story, so he moved to a slightly less shitty story, no matter how forced it was. Most of the story is trash, but when it deals with the father-son feud and the story behind it, there's real potential. Minus the public opinion shifting sides and seconds thing they had going on. Plus, out of all the stories presented so far, it does have the hypest final battle. More of that. Less of this.
Truth be told, I'm lucky to still be alive. No normal person could understand the reality of everything I've seen. The truth of it all.
Although the normal ending seems way more conclusive than the secret ending. So basically the story could have done more or focused solely on the Mishima family and the people most strongly tied to them, but instead we got a kind of okay family story with horrible fluff in between that is greatly saved by the cinematic final battle. And finally, the last example for this video is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, which is actually okay. It's still not great, but it is better than I thought. Much better than Street Fighter V's story. It's silly and corny and full of problems, of which I will get to and complain about, but there are good parts in this as well. There are a couple lines of dialogue that are genuinely good, but they're usually mixed in with terrible dialogue. You even get a couple of nice character moments, such as Hiryu not used to working on a team and having to learn to thank his team. It's great, but these moments are very few and very far between. I get having a huge cast like this would make it hard to focus on individual characters, but that thought immediately gets debunked when you realize that previous examples have had that point done well. Jumping the gun on negatives, so I guess back to positives. Once in a while, the stages can be cool, such as Chris fighting a giant symbiote monster in the background. It's a little detail that really did not need to be made, but it did. Wish that love went into the rest of the game. A couple of the fights can be cool as well, but the standout, for me at least, was Dante vs. Jedha. Come on, a full-on, powered-up demon form devil hunter versus an incredibly powerful demon one-on-one. That's awesome, and I wish the story had more moments like that. The final boss itself might be kind of bad for a fighting game, but if this was in a Mega Man X game, it would be almost perfect. Not to mention that Ghost Rider and Morrigan scene. I would let her seduce me any day, even with the fucked up face. All these little moments show that the story at least had some effort put into it and could have been something great. But I'm sure most people want me to tear into it. So here we go. Not counting the obvious stuff both fighting game stories have and normal stories have, such as everybody being an idiot and not thinking logically, the misunderstandings that cause fights that get resolved immediately, thereby making the fights pointless filler, some characters that appear for one fight and serve no purpose otherwise, etc. But this story has its own share of problems. Ryu's Satsui no Hara becomes a part of the plot, but for no other reason than to set up a sequel. Wasn't he supposed to be overcome with murderous intent only during intense moments such as almost dying or friends in great distress? In this, it seems to be when he gets slightly irritated. If it served an actual purpose in the plot, it would be fine, but it's only shown so that it doesn't randomly come out of nowhere when Thanos takes it. Plus, unlike previous situations, it doesn't really seem to be a problem suppressing it for Ryu. Most of the time it takes tremendous effort to hold it back, but he just blinks and it's gone. One big problem with the plot is when it tries to have a twist. Dante gave the big bad exactly what he wanted. Oh no! So only the 10-year-olds were fooled, right? Dante may not be 100% a hero, but he is a good guy and would never betray his friends. What were they thinking? As cheap as it might be to kill off a character for shock value, that would have made more of an impact than making it seem like Dante is turning to the bad side. It wasn't even convincing. These are the biggest problems with the story. It's campy, corny, makes little sense, and it's not written well, but it's not terrible. That's a positive, apparently, not being terrible. So, I guess after all of this, the biggest question is, should we expect great stories from fighting games? After all, the point of a fighting game is the gameplay, so is a story really necessary? It's not necessary, no. If a fighting game does not want to have a story mode, it doesn't have to. Having one brings in more of the casual audience, but it's not mandatory. If a fighting game has one, though, it should be made as well as possible. Why go through all the work of having a story mode if it looks half-assed? It doesn't need to be an Academy Award-winning story, but if the developers feel that they really want a story, they should make it as good and as entertaining as possible. The good kind of entertaining, not the room kind of entertaining. It doesn't make much sense to spend so much on a story mode and do jack shit with it.
The Satsui no Hado has conquered gods and demons. And death. We shall see.
The story has three major plot points: introducing the new Earthrealm warriors, the Outworld Civil War, and the resurrection of Shinnok. The first part, god damn, fucking bull. Heidi Mickey ho. Tekken 7 is better than Street Fighter 5, but not by much. I mean, it does state the story as the Mishima Saga, but they took it very literally, as only the stuff dealing with Kazuya and Heihachi are done okay. Any other moment doesn't add up to anything, and by the end, there's a lot of plot holes and almost no Tekken 7 is better than Street Fighter 5, but not by much. I mean, it does state the story as the Mishima Saga, but they took it very literally as the only. Why do I keep doing that? Not counting the obvious stuff both fighting game stories have and normal stories have, such as everybody being an idiot and not thinking logically, and the misunderstandings that cause fights that get resolved immediately, thereby making the fights pointless filler. Some characters that appear for fights are now called pites.